Top of the morning, Tarver.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee meeting. It's Friday morning. Appreciate you all being here, and appreciate all the smiles out there in the group. There's a smile. I see a couple now. Mark, would you take the roll, please?
Representative Campbell,
Excused.
Representative Knapp. Here. Representative Larson,
Excused.
Representative Lawley,
Here.
Representative Riggins,
Excused.
Representative Schmidt,
Here.
Representative Tarver,
Here.
Representative Weber,
Here.
Chairman Heiner.
Here. I guess we're wearing them out. They're starting to drop off. Yep. Some of them have some other committee they're going to present bills right now, but we'll keep going with those that we have. Our first bill, our first Senate file we're going to hear was unfortunately delayed from last time. Senator Dockstader, Senate File 138, Energy Impact on Wyoming Economy. Welcome to our little committee meeting, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Let's jump right into it. This kind of started a few years ago.
Senator, would you introduce yourself for the?
Dan Dockstader, Senate District 16.
Thank you.
And
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, this started a few years ago when the industry announced the start of the closures of power plants, and that meant coal mines and all of that. Sitting on the floor one night and I thought, how do I stop this? So I started what was the first of a series of legislative moves to run interference to closures. Why? Because it's jobs, it's people employed, it's our communities. And the initial attack went well. And we said, when we were all done and Governor signed off, I said, no, you're not gonna close it. But my interest still continued on as I traveled around the state and looked at all of the energy-related matters that were happening around the state. And I thought, this is incredible. Do we realize how much money is being spent for the state, how much in funds and jobs, and what it means to all parts of the state? It impressed me so much that last year, when the previous administration was trying to shut down a section of our state in southwest Wyoming, loaded up some Sweetwater friends and headed out to Washington, D.C., own time, own expense, and said, don't do this. And my argument was, you destroy communities when you do this. We have livelihoods, we have families, and when you do this, all that is harmed and hurt, and we can find a balance. We don't need that kind of a closure. More and more I thought, let's get an exact count on what we're doing in the energy-related economy. So I put together Senate File 138, Mr. Chairman, Energy Impact on Wyoming Study. And I'll just, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I'll just go through it a little bit here.
Please do.
Page 1, we call for the study. And I was looking for a way to do it without an appropriation, very conscious about asking for money. We got the Energy Authority to agree to do that study and the School of Energy Resources to run backup. So that's where you see that wording in the very beginning. And then we ask other state agencies to cooperate, get it all done by October 1st of 2025. In other words, we don't want to draw it out. Requires page 2, general information on the mineral production and energy production, determines the economic impact of that production. And then we look not only at the state as a whole, but the major regions around the state, so no one's left out. We look at the individual types of energy and the mineral production, the amount of, and this is key, the amount of state and local taxes that come from it. We're going back 10 years for that. And then the number of employees. And that was my driving force clear back when they were trying to close down a plant in the south end of my county. Number of employees there in the coal mine. We go back 10 years for that. The payroll, we wanted to go a little easier on the companies, say, let's just go back 5 years on that, but nonetheless still pull it together. And then look at, in general, other economic benefits from it. This is on page 3. We'll take a look at innovations in energy that are coming along, look for other information related to energy along the way. The Energy Authority, as they do this, can request the help of the state agencies, higher education. I mentioned the School of Energy stepping in to help. Again, on page 4, the October 1st deadline, and then reports back to the Joint Appropriations, Joint Revenue, Joint Minerals Committee. Mr. Chairman, we look at energy as a whole. That industry that I traveled back to DC with my Sweetwater friends to talk about, total industry value on that, $652.8 million. Number of employees, 2,397. When we've invested in energy, put 98 million into it, we've leveraged 260 million. That's included oil and gas projects, coal, helium, critical mineral, and rare earth. I think we're on a new track with new support from a positive administration, and I'd just like to narrow it down so that everybody understands just what it means to Wyoming financially, but more important to me, jobs, because jobs support families and make self-sustaining people. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Representative Lawley, questions for the senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Senator Dockstader. Good to see you. This is a fantastic idea, and I appreciate you bringing it. My only question is, do you feel like, and maybe this is for the Energy Authority, but that the deadline is doable to obtain the data and the report that you're looking for?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative
Senator.
Lawley, we coordinated that because it is coming a little quicker, but everybody felt that it was feasible.
Follow up? Any other questions? Representative Knapp, please. Chairman Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, I do like this idea because way back when you envisioned it, I think it served a purpose. And now that things are moving so rapidly in the opposite direction, it still serves a purpose. I think it'll be vital to testimony in the new administration as well to achieve Wyoming's goals. So would you agree that even though that purpose has shifted, maybe a little bit, that the data is still important?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Knapp, we now have traction at the federal level. And this, I would like to walk into meetings and say, look how many jobs in your part of the state. Look at the payroll and all that goes with it. Thank you.
Representative Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Senator.
Good morning.
I like the idea too. My question is does this include any type of green energy projects? Or is it mostly limited to minerals and fossil fuels?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, if you call it that, other information, other innovations of energy, that's not my focus. My focus is what brought us to the dance in Wyoming, all the fossil fuels.
I like the sounds of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Weber, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Senator Dockstader. What was the number of the employees that you had mentioned in
In
when
the
you were
patch,
talking? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, number of employees in the patch, 2,397. I'd buy an airplane ticket, Mr. Chairman, any day to go to bat for those people.
Follow up. Representative Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Dockstader, I know I wasn't part of what you had done in the past, but I like that you had put a lot of time into thinking about the financial impact. And I really appreciate the fact that you're putting in there with some of the other entities that could help make this happen, and especially by October of this year.
Mr. Chairman, as a response, that's okay. Representative Weber,
Please.
we wanted some more people at the table, and that divides up the responsibilities. We can get the information. But what was important to me is we use existing resources and not ask for new money to put this together.
Any other questions for the senator? Senator, once you assemble this information and put a bow around it, how do we disseminate that out to the general public, and which audience do you envision getting this to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In addition to those reports back to those joint committees that I mentioned, that's a starting point, but not opposed to even holding a press conference to say, this is what it means to the state of Wyoming. This is what it means to the Northeast, the Southwest. This is what it means. And I would hope those communities, Mr. Chairman, once they have this information, the Gillette or Rock Springs could go back and even make it more finite and say, this is what it means to our Main Street business.
Very good. I appreciate that because, Senator, I don't think there's a lot of our citizens that realize how important our natural resources are. And just the little bill that we did for pooling, Senate File 20 here recently, realizing that 15% of our revenue comes from those small oil producers and the impact that could have had on our state as a whole, I don't think the citizens realize how dependent we are on natural resources. So I would appreciate having that opportunity to disseminate that in the media, to be able to help us to get that out to individuals and to counties. Is there any effort to work with the County Commissioners Association to get that out to the various counties as well?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Appreciate the idea. I had not thought about going straight to the head of them and saying, okay, here's the information. Would you personally take that into your next joint meeting across the state? Remind them what drives the engine.
Good, thank you. All right, any other questions for the senator? Seeing none, thank you very much. Sorry we put you off last time we met.
That's okay.
Any other agencies of the state? Mr. Krieger, thank you. I see you were on the edge of your seat, ready to jump up here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Rob Krieger. I serve as the Executive Director of the Wyoming Energy Authority. For some of you that are sort of new to the legislature, just some background on who we are as the Energy Authority. We are a quasi-state entity. So I answer to a board of directors from private industry. So I have 7 voting members, 3 of which come from the coal patch, 2 from oil and gas, 1 from the utility, and 1 from renewables. So we are essentially our kind of state's Department of Energy, as you want to put that. First to the question, yes, we can get this done by October 1. We have good partnerships with all our other entities around the state that work on energy, and we feel very confident we can get that done. When working with the bringer of this bill, this is something that frankly we should be doing already. And when you look at the Energy Authority, we're very small. We're up to 8 people now, which is our sort of max, but compare that to our neighbors to the south, they have over 60, 30 of those focused on, say, climate, right? So we're a very small group, but we are built out now to those 8 people, and with our partnerships, feel very confident that we can do that and kind of bring our head out of the trenches from just doing projects to explaining what those projects mean and what each area of the energy industry means, because as was mentioned earlier, sometimes folks have a very good background in the impacts of oil and gas, but don't maybe understand Trona or coal as much. And so I see this report as bringing all that together to show the jobs, the revenues, and anything else. You know, on page 2, it says at a minimum, and then lists all the different things. So I really would look forward to working with you all in this committee as well, if there's certain things that you want us to make sure we point out to get in that report as well. To Chairman Knapp's point, yes, the momentum out east is certainly in a better direction for us, and we already have worked with this new administration, and they've asked, hey, you know, what would it mean to reduce maybe the royalty rate on coal? How could that maybe help the coal patch? And so I agree with you that that's a good, you know, regardless of who's out east, having this sort of report to point to would be good. And I think once we do the big lift of getting the initial one out, that we can just update this annually too, as numbers change and different things happen. So really just wanted to hit on that, say we're built and ready to take this on, and look forward to presenting it to you all in October. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Krieger. Appreciate that. Questions? Starting over here with Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Director Krieger. I kind of tagging on to the discussion we're having about then disseminating the information. You know, government is so great about collecting, but always, you know, disseminating is always kind of an issue. And I think that's a really important goal. Obviously, it's come up in our discussion. What are some thoughts you have about how, I'm even thinking of legislators and things that the message needs to be everywhere and at every level. And so having some other ways that you and the Wyoming Energy Authority would work in cooperation with, after having done the work, to really help the Wyoming people legislators, people that work for the state better understand the impact of the energy sector in all these different forms. Any thoughts about that, or what you could do? Because I think that's really partly key here. Because so many times studies are done, but they kind of just get put in a drawer. And so I too have a concern about that, and do we have a good plan for execution of something like that, or could we develop that plan?
Director Krieger?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, that's a great question. You know, when this was on the other side of the building, we talked about the fact that industry is going to be a huge partner in this as well. So I know county commissioners were mentioned, I think WHAM, we've already talked with the Rural Electric Association, PAW, all those folks, and I think, you know, bringing them all in as we craft this too, because, you know, they're the folks that do this every day, and we help on that. So I think, you know, once we get that report put together, I think it'd be smart to almost do a roadshow and head out to each community in each region that produces maybe a different type of energy, and bring you all in as the legislators in those regions and just talk about it. Maybe it's a town hall or whatever, you know, you all would like to do. But I think just the more we sort of pound the pavement and get this out there, I have a good comms team on board that can make a rather dense report look nice. And so they're already equipped to start looking at that once we get all the information down on paper. So I think it's really all hands on deck. And that's, I think, the nice thing too about the Energy Authority. I mentioned that we're small, but we really are the hub for energy in Wyoming. So we look at it as, you know, bringing everyone together, that we don't necessarily have to own anything. We just want the ball to get rolling and make sure folks understand. So I think that's a good point, and something, again, we'll be working with everyone we can.
Follow up? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that answer. That I really appreciate those ideas, and would be willing to sign on board for you guys to come to my district. I think those of us on this committee already are advocates and try to talk about the energy sector and how important it is, and the work that we try to do in this committee. And so, you know, that's a good place to start maybe, but I think this would amplify our voice in very important ways to our constituents, and even to our, like I said, fellow legislators and others that we work with, that to understand that they have their committees they serve on and their interests. So again, I just would tell you, or ask you if I could be first on that list or somewhere at the top.
Director?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Director, so this is, maybe extends out a little bit, this study that we're planning on doing, but we'll do the natural resources and, you know, coal, oil, all these things, and how much impact it has on our state, the revenue and employment and everything. Could we also have, as a comparison, wind and solar energy? How many jobs that actually employs here in Wyoming? And the same kind of metrics, jobs, payroll, things like that, so that we can see natural resources versus alternative energy. And because I don't know how many jobs we have that are people employed by wind and solar. I would like to know that, and what kind of taxes they pay, what kind of benefits we receive. I may or may not be surprised when that information comes out. Is that possible to do as well, Director?
Mr. Chairman, I think absolutely that looking at this bill, I think it would be our bread and butter of oil, gas, and coal, but then, you know, Trona, and also bring in, you know, rare earths are really kind of rising in Wyoming as well. I think it is important to show the different areas of energy or minerals, the jobs, the taxes. I think another big piece are these temporary or permanent jobs. I think that's a big piece when we look at this as well. So again, when I read page 2, it says at a minimum, and the way we've kind of gone at this is let's look at the whole gamut, bring it all together, compare that, show it side by side, so folks again do understand what that means. And just if I could on that, we're going to partner with the School of Energy Resources on a different sort of study that'll be a social license study. They've done it a couple of years back in, I think, 21 and 23, and not to kind of give folks fatigue from hearing people call about political polls, but this would essentially be a poll to get the state's understanding of what is their interest, right? Are they favorable to coal? Are they favorable to solar? Are they favorable to what is it? Just so we can kind of see what that looks like as we, again, go forward and see, you know, if folks, I don't think we'd run into this, but say they didn't like coal, right? We could say, well, here's all the jobs and here's all the benefits that coal has produced through the state of Wyoming for decades. So we're kind of going to do that at the same time. But to your question, yes, I think we can absolutely compare everything.
Great, great, Director. We've seen a build out on wind energy last decade, and I'd just like to see what the impact is on the state for that. So as you get this report together, we've talked about disseminating to the counties, to municipalities. How will this report benefit WEA? What do you plan on doing with this information once you have it?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. As you all know, we manage a decent amount of grant funding. I think, you know, the difficult nature of energy right now, to Chairman Knapp's point, is the sort of innovation that's taking place. At the end of the day, though, we need an ROI, right? And so I think this report can show that where is probably the best area to spend some of that money to get that ROI, whether that's jobs or severance taxes. We already have that to an extent, but I think it'd be important. We were sort of heading down this path already for the energy matching funds because we realized that we've done a poor job of explaining exactly what we've done with that money, that we've just kind of had our heads down doing these projects. So how do we lift our head out of that and show the ROI on it? So I think this study can do that as well. And I think that's again, sort of your comparison question, I think is just a route we can do to show, you know, here's the different areas and here's who really brings in a lot of money for the state of Wyoming and who maybe doesn't.
All right, thank you. Representative Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Director. Quick question. Will the study compile any information on how regulation can affect the revenues from the mineral industry and jobs and everything else that, I mean, to me, that would be an important number, important information to be able to just see what regulation does and how it can really affect this industry.
Director?
Great, Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes. I think when we look at, frankly, what had happened the last 4 years, there was a lot of troublesome, obviously you all are familiar with the RMPs, but also that we've had some litigation and some attorneys on contract to look at the Clean Power Plan 2.0, because that is extremely difficult for the state of Wyoming. So I think that's an important piece in all this, and that, you know, we know the industries that's mainly going to hit, but I think that's important for folks to understand too, that, you know, if, for example, if we have to shut down all of these coal-fired power plants or even gas, right, in the Clean Power Plan 2.0, what does that mean long-term for the mining? And are companies going to stop, you know, buying more land to mine, or are they able to right now? And all of those sort of things. So I think absolutely that the regulatory aspect of this is going to be very difficult to kind of lift out of all the, you know, the jargon that goes in those regulatory pieces, but I think is extremely important for folks to understand.
Any other questions? Director, thank you. You must have one of the most efficient organizations we have in the state, with only 8 people to be able to take on something like this with no fiscal, no additional money.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we try.
All right, thank you very much. Any other departments from the state that would like to testify? Any citizens that are here, that individuals representing themselves? Okay, anybody that is representing other organizations that would like to provide some testimony? Got a lot of people here, but nobody wants to talk. Anyone online, Mark? No one online. Okay, with that, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your move? Moved by Vice Chair Tarver, seconded by Representative Lawley. Any discussion? Question already? You don't want to go through line by line? All right, question being called. Mark, roll call vote on Senate File 138, Energy Impact on Wyoming Economy Study.
Representative Campbell.
Excused.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson has voted aye. Representative Lawley.
Aye.
Representative Riggins,
Excused?
Representative Schmidt,
Aye.
Representative Tarver,
Aye.
Representative Weber,
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye. All right, thank you. So Senate File 138 has passed the committee, a recommended do pass. Thank you, Senator, for being here. I assume you will want myself to carry this on the floor, Senator? All right, thank you. I'm sure the committee will help. There'll be a lot of support on this. Okay, welcome.
Morning, I'm sorry.
That's fine. We'll go on now to Senate File 17, Carbon Dioxide Enhanced Oil Recovery Stimulus. Who do we have that wants to talk about this bill? This Senate file, excuse me. Mr. Obermuller, thank you for being here.
Et cetera.
Sounds like you found excuses.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So, Mr. Chairman, Pete Obermuller, President of the Petroleum Association. Good morning. Nice to see you all. Mr. Chairman, what's your pleasure? Would you like me to
Yes, please.
explain the bill or just launch right into it, or what would you?
Explain the nexus of the bill and
Okay.
then launch into it, please.
Alrighty, happy to do that. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, at its core, Mr. Chairman, what the bill is attempting to do is to have Wyoming step in and try to correct, from our perspective, an imbalance in the market for how captured CO2 is used. So, the landscape that we have before us currently is that the federal tax code provides a tax credit for permanent sequestration of CO2. You all know that. It's in the section of code called 45Q. What 45Q does is it provides a per ton tax credit for at varying levels depending on how you use CO2. So the very highest one, actually, Mr. Chairman, you will all love. It's for direct air capture. I think that one is somewhere in the $120 per ton range. But that has this bill has nothing to do with that part. Don't touch that part at all. The next level is $85 a ton for a permanent sequestration. So deep saline, the sorts of things, just pure carbon capture and sequestration. The next lower level is $60 a ton for enhanced oil recovery. And that's what this bill is about, is that differential between the $60 a ton available for enhanced oil recovery and the $85 for permanent sequestration. What the federal government has done there is they have said, using the tax code, that they would prefer that CO2 be sequestered permanently and not used for productive purposes. So this committee, as it often does, like it did with SF20 and others, is it looks at that problem and tries to come up with a creative solution about how Wyoming could help to correct that. So what it does, essentially, and we can walk through the technical aspects of how it works, is Wyoming steps in to close that gap. So that if you're a CO2 owner, you're a producer of CO2 and you've captured and you have CO2 to try to offload, you're not looking at that landscape and saying, okay, well, the federal government's gonna give me 85 a ton if I just put it underground. But they're only gonna give me 60 a ton if I send it to do an EOR. So from a tax perspective, it's better for them to do sequestration than EOR. So the bill equalizes that. So at the very least, a CO2 owner is not incentivized to do permanent sequestration over EOR. That's the philosophy behind the bill. So now how do we make that work? So, Mr. Chairman, we could just walk through the bill and kind of talk through how that works.
Please do, Mr. Obermuller.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, we've created new sections here and created this carbon dioxide enhanced oil recovery stimulus. So, Mr. Chairman, on page 2, it walks through some definitions about what these all are. Again, it's at the Wyoming Energy Authority because this is a grant program essentially. it's a unique grant program because it's a grant using oil and gas taxes, but we'll get to that later. The Energy Authority already manages grants, as you've heard this morning, and so it was the right agency, we believe, to place it. And Mr. Chairman, when I say we, what I mean is 2 years ago, in not this last interim, but the interim before, a work group and then the Joint Minerals Committee worked on this for the entire year. And so when I say we, I'm not necessarily just referring to PAW, but there was a lot of folks that worked on this, including this committee. Okay, so various definitions there. They're all relatively self-explanatory. We can go on to page 3. Page 3 starts to talk about the qualifications, and what it talks about is a carbon dioxide provider. That's defined up above, but essentially that's a CO2 owner, a company or someone who's producing CO2 has captured it and has it to offload. If they're seeking this stimulus payment, then they would have an application to the Energy Authority, and to qualify, the CO2 has to be captured through use of CCUS technology, number 1, and move it on here to page 4. Lines 5, they have to deliver the CO2 for a project, for an EOR project based in Wyoming. And it has to be, the CO2 has to be stored in EOR project, and of course has to be sourced from Wyoming in the first place. Yeah, so that's the qualifications there. And then as we get to line 20 on page 4 and into page 5, it starts to reference 45Q. Now, this part is kind of important, Mr. Chairman. There's some question about why would we want to reference 45Q and what's the status of 45Q and all of that, and we can get to that in Q&A a little bit. But Mr. Chairman, basically what we did here is we linked qualification for this program to 45Q because 45Q has all of the requirements that companies have to file to prove that they've stored CO2 for EOR purposes, and the IRS already has its rules and forms in place for that. So if you qualify for 45Q, you have to qualify for that in order to qualify for this. If you can't qualify for that, you're not going to get this. Essentially why I have 45Q. The other important part about 45Q, and we'll get to this in a second, but the bill provides a couple of different off-ramps as it relates to 45Q. So the question is, well, what if 45Q goes away? It's federal law, and the U.S. Congress would need to repeal it, but let's assume they do. The bill has an off-ramp at that point that this program goes away if federal 45Q goes away. So it ends at that point. The other off-ramp that it has in the bill, Mr. Chairman, and the Senate, you have an engrossed version, and one of the things the Senate changed is part of this, is that if at the federal level, they equalize 45 EOR to sequestration with 45Q, which actually is preferable. It would rather the feds do it than us, but that's not what we're facing right now. That's not true. But if they do it, this goes away as well. And in fact, what the Senate did in your engrossed version, Mr. Chairman, is they stair-stepped that. If the federal government doesn't actually fully equalize it, but they bring it up, then ours proportionally goes down. So that the effort is to try to have us make sure it's equalized, not to go over and above what the feds have done or any of that, and then to just off-ramp it if it goes away. Okay, Mr. Chairman, moving on to page 5, lines 18. Line 18, this is the amount that is available for the stimulus per ton, so it's $10 per ton. Remember I said the differential is $25, so why $10 stimulus, but there's a $25 gap? Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of answers to that, but essentially it boils down to transportation costs related to permanent sequestration, and plus when you're doing EOR, you are in a contractual arrangement and you're selling CO2, and so you don't actually need the full $25 to equalize. The $10, we didn't pull that out of a hat. The University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources economists worked on this 2 interims ago to figure out what exactly is that number that can get us as close to equal as possible, and 10 is where that landed. Okay, so Mr. Chairman, moving on then to page 6, especially lines 8 and following. This is where you'll see the engrossed version where they start to do that stair step for for if 45Q changes at a particular level. And then on page 7, line 8, it references for the first time the creation of the Enhanced Oil Recovery Stimulus Account created by the bill. So here's how that works, moving on to page, the bottom of page 7 and into page 8. This is just basically the process of WA determining that you qualify. You send it to the auditor. The auditor then issues the grant check, et cetera, and then it reports back to you. So here's how the account works, Mr. Chairman. In contrast to what everyone is used to, we try to deal with the tax code by granting like a severance tax reduction or something like that. This doesn't cut anybody's taxes. The 6% severance tax for oil and gas remains. Instead, what it does is it takes 3% of the severance tax earned off of EOR projects as a result of the bill and reinvests it into that stimulus account. And then it becomes self-funding at that point. So initially, and you'll see this later in the appropriation, Mr. Chairman, there's an initial appropriation of $10 million from the LSRA to seed the account. Why do you have to do that? Well, in order to get the first project going and to pay for the grant, you have to have that seed money. But once that seed money starts to produce the oil, then you get your severance taxes, and that starts to refill. So the way the bill is set up, Mr. Chairman, is you take 10 million from the LSRA, you get a project going, and the very first thing that does is it fills back up the stimulus account back to 10 million. Then the next 10 million repays the LSRA. And then after that, it's self-funding. Now, how long does that take? It's a great question. It depends on whether a project happens. If a project doesn't happen, no harm, no foul. We've not spent any money. You just recapture the LSRA money. If a project happens and they continue to happen, it's not an immediate refill of the LSRA. It would, depending, we modeled it out based on the most likely projects to happen. You're looking at about an 8-year gap between when you invest and when you get it back. Now, after that, over time, and these projects are long-term, the School of Energy Resources estimated that the return is about a 30 to 33% return on your investment. Why? Because even at 3% severance, and after you've refilled all of these accounts, the severance coming in over the long term will bring in millions and in fact possibly billions over that long term. So at next to zero risk for the state, it's a reinvestment into trying to advance our EOR fields. And we've talked about this before, Mr. Chairman, about our 75 fields, each with at least 10 million barrels of oil recoverable using CO2 EOR. So our challenge has been, why aren't these projects happening? We haven't had a new EOR project for 12 years or more. There's lots of reasons for that, but one of them is the price of CO2 and the incentives from the federal government of where to send CO2 and all of that. So this was a creative solution to try to at least tackle that one problem. There's other problems, Mr. Chairman, that you've noted a lot, which is our infrastructure issues and all sorts of other things. So we had 2 committee-passed horses in this race, just to kind of fit in with the theme of this session about horses. And the Senate chose this one, and it's clever. But it is a little bit complicated, and I'm happy to answer questions. I should also note that the director of the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, Director Whitman, I believe, is out of town, but I think he's joined online in case there's questions about EOR.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Obermueller. Representative Lawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Obermueller. Good to see you.
Good morning.
I wanted to return to the anticipated discussion and questions about 45Q. My understanding is, as 45Q stands right now, was part of the first Trump administration's tax bill and tax policy. So if that's true, and I believe it to be, could you give me some of your thoughts, or even the industry as they're looking at the changes in Washington now, about whether it would be taken away or really possibly enhanced? Which really do you think is likely to happen, given that it was part of the original Trump administration tax policy?
Mr. Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's difficult to speculate, but here's what we know is in front of us. Nothing has changed about the legislation since it was, those amounts I mentioned were all bumped up under the previous Trump administration. Now we know that some of the large grant dollars, not related to 45Q, but related to other energy projects have, either they've been frozen or they're relooking at those or those sorts of things. But 45Q itself is in federal law. So Congress has to act on that. I am not aware of a bill to repeal it. I'm not aware that it's part of any discussions on reconciliation. What I am aware of is that Senator Barrasso has been gaining support and a lot of traction for his bill to equalize EOR with sequestration. He's reintroduced that bill. There's a lot of support. Appears to be some momentum behind it. I can't speculate about whether it'll pass. But to me, that seems the most likely. And again, the bill off ramps if that happens. This bill.
Follow up? Any other questions? Vice Chair Tarver, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Obermuller, for this. Do we have any interest in this particular legislation currently? Do you have anyone on the hook that is really anticipating this coming through?
Mr. Obermuller?
So, Mr. Chairman, we know of, and I think you're aware in and around your district, Representative Tarver, we know of at least 3 EOR projects that are further along than we've been in a really long time. So let me answer your question in 2 ways. One, what this does is, what the purpose of this is to say to a company that has CO2 to offload, again, it equalizes that tax code. But one of my members, Mr. Chairman, who's going to actually do the drilling of an EOR project, also will be fully aware that the state of Wyoming has come in and said, hey, we want you to focus on EOR. Now, those negotiations of contractual negotiation between the CO2 provider and the driller, will be fully aware of the tax implications of that and will ultimately end up sharing and sharing in that in this stimulus package. So what that means is in a contractual negotiation, there'll be downward pressure on the price of CO2. Downward pressure on the price of CO2 helps make projects like in your district more economical. So that was generally the idea behind it.
Vice Chair, follow up?
Yeah, I guess my question, I'll direct it a little bit more. I don't even know if you've had the opportunity to run this past them. I don't know if this bill would be a make or break for them. I mean, with this bill, would it allow them to move forward at a quicker pace? I mean, do they feel this bill is impactful for them, or do we need to work on something different, I guess is my real question.
Mr. Obermuller?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, that's a fair question. I think we need to work on something more. And I think maybe, not to tip my hand, I think we'll probably ask the committee to think about in the interim some conversation about infrastructure. I know the chairman's talked about this a lot. We have 456 some miles of dedicated CO2 pipeline in Wyoming, and then every project really has to spur off of that. And so, Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, one of the big challenges for that project in your neck of the woods is the $40-some million it's going to take to build, I can't remember what it is, 20, 30 miles of spur pipeline in order to make the project work. So there's more to it. Will this solve everything? No. But it puts downward pressure on CO2. And the other thing it doesn't, let me just say what it doesn't do. No one who is currently emitting CO2 and doesn't capture it is going to look at this bill and say, oh, well, now I'm going to capture it. This is not a capture CO2 incentive bill. This is a bill that if you have it and you need to offload it, Wyoming's nudging you gently to send it to EOR. That's what the bill is, but it does not incentivize capturing CO2.
Representative Knapp, Chairman Knapp, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obermueller, first, thank you for your efforts in the interim to solve problems, both in bonding and in the 45Q tax credits. And I agree with you that, similar to testimony on our last bill, our tax policy and our grant project objectives should be geared towards return on investment. So would you agree that the comments by the director of WEA for EOR on ROI would make us say okay?
It took me a moment to catch up with all those acronyms, but Mr. Obermueller.
That was a time release joke, Mr. Chairman. That was great. Yeah, I do agree with the director, and I agree with the senator's effort on that study too. I think that will be really helpful in this as well. Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, like I said, what's novel about this, Mr. Chairman, Representative Knapp, is it doesn't ask you to cut the taxes. It just asks you to reinvest it.
Representative Tarver, or Knapp, does that just roll off your tongue, or do you have to think about those things for a while?
Mr. Chairman, it was rolling in my head and I had to get it out.
Any follow-up? Do you have any more in there? Any other questions? Representative Schmidt, you had your hand up a while back? Nope? Okay. Mr. Obermueller, as I read through this and studied it and everything, I think I know the answer, but this is geared toward new EOR and not existing. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So if we know the infrastructure is very expensive to get CO2 to the location where it can be injected for EOR. And we know that direct air capture is very much more lucrative for 45Q. So what would be the 45Q tax credit if a direct air capture was built at a future EOR location and used for EOR? Would you get to 120 or would you get to $60 per ton?
At the federal level, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
That's a great question.
Could you double up?
I don't. Mr. Chairman, no, I think direct air capture, I have to go back and look. I could probably get the answer in the next 5 minutes while other people are talking. I've got the whole thing on 45Q, but I believe direct air capture has to be, to get the 120 or whatever, it has to be for permanent
It
sequestration.
should be permanent, okay,
Right.
all right. That's
But
what
I'm going to confirm that,
That
Mr.
was
Chairman.
what-
I
was
think I
afraid
have
of
that
that,
here.
yeah.
And there may be others here that know the answer to that question for sure, but I can look while we're sitting here.
Okay, all right, thank you. Representative Lawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on that, is that not something addressed in Senator Barrasso's bill, that he also addresses that about the only alternative being permanent sequestration on direct air capture, or is it not a part of his bill that he's proposing on 45Q?
Mr. Obermueller.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I think I'd have to look to be sure, which I can do here while we're sitting here.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. Representative Weber, you're very intent here. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Obermueller.
You're welcome, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Any others? We've got two here, Director Krieger, and then we'll do the EOI after that. Welcome back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, Rob Krieger, Executive Director of the Energy Authority. To answer that last question, Barrasso's bill does do that. So the direct air capture 45Q credit, I know Pete can get the number. It is a lot higher than for utilization or sequestration, but they do have, it's not balanced right now as well. So if you have direct air capture, you just store it, I think it's like $130 a ton maybe. If you utilize that for EOR or other means, it drops off as well. So Barrasso's bill would levelize that as well.
Okay.
The only other thing I'll say is that I know we administer this. It's very detailed in the bill, what we're supposed to do, working with the auditor and the governor's office. So we stand ready to do this as well. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Director. Any questions for the Director of WEA? Seeing none, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Matt Sachet. I'm the Administrator of the Mineral Tax Division of the Department of Revenue. As was testified to earlier, the Energy Authority will be carrying most of the water on this. But there is a section that is a little bit concerning to the Department of Revenue, and we'd like to bring it to your attention. In beginning on page 9, line 18, that's where the department's requirements are. That's where the meat is. And the first portion is we are perfectly happy with. All we need to do is run an analysis of the additional taxes that are received from this program. We have that data. If you look at page 10, line 6, it requires the department to report the amount of the stimulus provided. Honestly, we would not have that information. We would be happy to collect that information, but that we would not be the source. Once again, that would be the Energy Authority that would have that data. And if you are to look on, I'm jumping around here a little bit, sorry, but if you are to look at page 9, we're required to do this on August 1st. And if you look at page 8, the Energy Authority is not required to report until November 1st. So we would have really no way of finding that data and reporting it until the Energy Authority collected it and reported it themselves. So if you wish to have this data reported by the Energy Authority, that would be great. If you wish to move the date back so that they report it first and then we can report it, that would also be fine with us. But other than that, I will stand for questions.
Mr. Sachet, any reason why the requirement is August 1st in here? Why the reason for that? It's not the end of a fiscal year. It's kind of in the middle of everything.
It's my anniversary, sir. Maybe that's why they chose it. I have no idea. I was not involved in the drafting of this bill, so I don't really know what the thinking was.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions? Vice Chair Tarver.
Mr. Sachet, so what date would work the best for you if we just moved the August date to November 15th? Would that work for you, or would you prefer they just report it, or what would your preference be on this?
Mr. Sachet?
Mr. Chairman, we can do either, Representative Tarver. We could move it back to the 15th. That would be good, and we can collect it, but we're not the source of that data. If you have questions on it, the source would be the Energy Authority.
All right. So giving a little bit of time for lead time for mail and everything, maybe even the end of December, first part of the year, because everything revolves around the legislature, I believe, so.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, any other questions for the Department of Revenue? Thank you for bringing that out to our attention, Mr. Sachet. Any other government officials, departments? Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Robert Short, Commerce County Commissioner and Vice President of Wyoming County Commissioners Association. And I'm generally in favor of this bill. I do have one concern over definitions of providers. I would like to see a narrower definition targeted at those who emit CO2 associated with consumption of CO2-laden products, such as, for example, coal. I guess some of my concern, and Pete is going to want to kick me in the teeth, of course, would be for us to equalize CO2 based on CO2 that's produced from the ground. If we drill for CO2, specifically for enhanced oil recovery, is almost antithetical to the promise of trying to reduce CO2 emissions associated with some of our legacy industries that are under assault from EPA regulatory overreach that simply seeks to crush our legacy industries. If those industries are unfairly, to a degree, impacted by a offset in CO2 imbalance associated with Q45, because the producer of CO2 that does not generate CO2, but specifically only produces CO2 from a drilled well, maybe it's a little bit antithetical again to trying to increase the longevity of those CO2 emitters versus a CO2 producer. So personally, and of course, I'm speaking selfishly because in Converse County, we have a CO2 emitter that I would love to see be able to utilize an EOR focused capture system to provide opportunity for us to utilize what is now stranded oil in the Big Muddy oil field 7 miles to the west of that producing facility. And of course, there is no bolt-on CO2 capture system attached to that facility as of yet, but I would love to see that happen, obviously, because again, it benefits not just my community, but the entirety of the state. So generally, in support of this, would like to see the language slightly tweaked to really reflect that this is inspiring folks to capture CO2 out of emitted sources rather than benefiting from produced only CO2 that's produced specifically from a drilled location, just as a for instance, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Short. Appreciate that. Any questions?
I got one.
Vice Chair Tarver.
Mr. Short, I feel your pain on this one because these thoughts I think are running through a lot of people's minds. I don't really have a question for you. I understand where you're going with this, but it's almost as if we got to play with the deck of cards that were given to us. And, but I certainly understand where you're coming from on this, and thank you for your testimony on this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any comment on that non-question?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, absolutely. It is a very challenging situation that we're trying to walk a very fine line on. That obviously the enhanced oil recovery is a great benefit to us in multiple ways, not the least of which is oil is absolutely germane to so much of what industry requires, whether it's on a chemical basis or whether it's on a byproduct basis, whether it's producing fuel for locomotion. We absolutely need to continue producing these hydrocarbons. They're fundamental, whether it's in that device or the device you drive or the clothes we wear. So we definitely cannot get by without oil. And maybe the deck of cards that we're dealt is what we have to deal with currently, but I would echo the prior speaker, Mr. Obermuller's point that this is a beginning. I think we need to continue working this subject. Obviously, incentives are what inspire many of our industrial endeavors. And I think that they look for those as a piece of the puzzle. It's not the magic bullet that causes an investment or spurs someone on, but it's a piece of the puzzle when they're doing the calculus on ROI.
Thank you, Commissioner. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony. Yes, Mr. Obermuller. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to answer your previous question about 45Q and the various levels. So for permanently geologically sequestered CO2, as I mentioned, it's $85 a ton, but $180 a ton for direct air capture for permanently sequestered. For sequestered CO2 with EOR, that's the $60 I mentioned per ton, or it's $130 if you do it with direct air capture. And then other qualified uses is it's at $60, $130 as well. So that would be advanced manufacturing, other uses of CO2, but that bill doesn't cover that. So, so to your question, if you have a DAC facility and you use it for EOR, you're getting $130 a ton under the bill, and $180 if it's sequestered. So there's a what is that, a $50 per ton gap there. If a DAC facility were built in Wyoming, that's highly unlikely. If a DAC facility were built in Wyoming and they used it for EOR and got that and qualified for the stimulus, they would get that $10 per ton additional, but that wouldn't close the gap for DAC.
But Mr. Obermueller, if the source of CO2 was DAC, it would double the 45Q from 60 up to 120. And this bill only
130.
brings it up $10, but that would actually bring it up $50 or $60.
Yeah, if it's, if you, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. I mean, if you use DAC for EOR, it's $130 a ton, so it'd bring it up that much.
$70.
Yeah, correct.
Well, thank you. That's very informative.
Sequestration would be $180 a ton.
Yeah, that would, we would have to overcome the sequestration hurdle, but.
Right, correct. So the bill doesn't really contemplate dealing with direct air capture, in large part because it's pretty unlikely that we're gonna get a DAC facility in Wyoming. It just doesn't work very well at high elevation. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the answer to that question. With respect to the good commissioner's definition, I would, maybe I'm misunderstanding, and he can help me out, but I think we want the definition of carbon dioxide provider to be broad, precisely to cover what he is talking about. It's the way it's written, anyone who produces and can capture carbon would qualify. So that would be, the cement plant south of Laramie. It would be, soda ash in southwest Wyoming, coal-fired utilities, anyone who is an emitter of CO2, and we have several in Wyoming, would qualify for this. So maybe I misunderstood what the commissioner was talking about, but I think narrowing the definition would actually be, would limit it more than we would want to, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Obermueller. Representative Lawley, question for Mr. Obermueller.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on that, that was my reading as well. The actual reading of the definition on page 2 is very broad, and it seemed to me that they would be included by that broad definition. So thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Representative.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, with respect to the Department of Revenue, I'm glad to see the senators here because his mind is a steel trap for remembering all these conversations. But I think that might have been an oversight to have the Department of Revenue do that reporting as opposed to the Energy Authority. I wouldn't see a reason why you wouldn't just leave the reporting requirement, but make Director Krieger do it instead.
Okay. Representative Campbell, please. We have a dignitary in the room, so we'll get to you in a moment here, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I was just wondering if maybe we could bring Rob back up here, because it seems like everything's leading back to the Energy Authority as far as dates and gathering points and everything, so I was hoping maybe Rob could come up and talk with these guys.
Director Krieger, would you care to weigh in on these dates and reports?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd echo Pete's comments. That might have just been an oversight. We're happy to, if you want to change that, amend that out, and just have us do the reporting, we're happy to do it.
So, Director, you would do all of the reporting that's right now being required of the Department of Revenue. You would assemble all that data, or would you just want to move that one portion, the stimulus provided, away from the Department of Revenue to the WEA?
Mr. Chairman, either works. I mean, we would essentially be giving out that stimulus, so all that, we're gonna have all those records to begin with, so.
Mr. Chairman.
I don't think that's an issue.
But Director Krieger, the amount of severance taxes remitted to the department, that's all the Revenue Department, is it not?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that piece I think should probably stay with DOR.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you
Mr.
did,
Obermuller?
either way, if you left it the way it is, the two agencies would have to work together. If you changed it entirely to Director Krieger, they'd still have to work together to figure it out. If you just changed it on line 6, where it says the department, line 6, page 10, the Department of Revenue shall report the amount of stimulus provided. That's what the Department of Revenue doesn't know. So that would be the change where they don't have to coordinate on it.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Senator Rothfuss, thank you for coming. You're kind of like a blister, show up when the work's all done here.
Yeah, happy to be here, Mr. Chairman. Nothing to add.
That's a good one.
I was hoping to get here in time to answer questions, but it sounds like they all got answered, Mr. Chairman.
They have done very well.
Excellent.
You picked a good team. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any other departments of the state that would like to testify? Any individual citizens of the state that would like to testify that are here in the room? Seeing none, those that represent other organizations, Rennie, please.
Rennie McKay, president of the Wyoming Business Alliance, and I think as said to you all before, we represent businesses from across the state, all industries, and all sizes of companies. And like the state of Wyoming, we definitely have a high percentage of our members who are from the oil and gas industry in one stripe or another. So that may also mean those folks who work in manufacturing and produce product for oil and gas, oil field services folks too. So just like Wyoming's economy, we are very dependent on oil and gas. And I think I'll start by just saying too that as you talked about on the last bill, we are certainly, as the Business Alliance, so appreciative of the oil and gas industry because of not just what they do for the GDP and jobs across Wyoming, but also for all of our members in terms of how we've kept taxes low in Wyoming and how appreciative and dependent we are on oil and gas. So I think as you look at this bill, I think you've got a unique opportunity to see if we can continue to supply more product to help the oil and gas industry. And I think looked at a couple of different options this interim and sure appreciate what the committee and what PAW did to develop some options for you. But I think that this is a great idea to move forward to see if we can continue to be a leader in enhanced oil recovery. I think as you just discussed sources too, I think that that's a pretty key conversation because there's plenty of folks who are looking at Wyoming and always have because Wyoming's been on the forefront of policy and practice for CO2 management and especially CO2 utilization and that side of it. So I think as you look at sources, you want to attract CO2 here because of what, and especially if you're trying to attract CO2 here to enhance oil recovery. So I think just want to say thank you for working on this bill. And on behalf of the Business Alliance, we want to thank the oil and gas industry for all they do. And if this can continue to help that industry, I think that that's something we should all try to push forward, and that's why we're in support of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Any questions for Mr. McKay, Wyoming Business Alliance? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you for your time. Any others that represent organizations here in the room? Let's go to Zoom. Nothing in the room, we'll go to Zoom.
Lon Whitman.
Director Whitman, good morning to you. You're on mute, we don't hear you.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Beautiful country you're in, Mr. Whitman.
Yeah, I wish that's where I was, but looks can be deceiving. Thank you. I'm happy to add any comment or answer any questions anyone might have. Lon Whitman, Director of the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. We were very involved over those 2-year period that Mr. Obermuller mentioned with Senator Rothfuss developing this bill. I think they've done a great job covering it. But if you have any questions, I'm glad to address any of those.
Any questions for Director Whitman? Director, is your organization working with some producers at the moment on EOR that you can tell the committee that, what are you actively involved in right now for future EOR projects?
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to answer that question. There's currently 4 fairly significant EOR projects in development. One that we have talked about with the Joint Minerals Committee, 2 of them actually. There's a 3-field Minaloosa Reservoir flood up near Gillette that's being put together by a company called TR Operating out of Denver. The head of TR Operating formerly worked with Anadarko at Salt Creek, so quite a background in CO2 EOR. That project's advancing quite nicely. They've worked and interfaced with Exxon for CO2 for that project. Mr. Obermueller mentioned the pipeline spurs required. Theirs is a 42-mile spur off of the Exxon Denbury Green Corps line at a cost of just about $1 million a mile, which is what basically these pipeline spurs, pipeline development will cost. You're talking in $1 million a mile for those pipelines. That project's advancing nicely. You're looking at preliminary estimates of roughly 85 million barrels of oil from that project. And again, those barrels are incremental oil. In other words, oil that will never be produced without an EOR project. So that's where the revenue substantiation for the state comes. It's all oil that would be stranded or left behind. The other 3 projects, Commissioner Short mentioned the Big Muddy project. We've been involved with Glenrock Energy for many years on that project, located just in Glenrock, just outside of Glenrock. You drive through that field when you're on I-25 between Glenrock and Casper. Their location, as Commissioner Short mentioned, is quite lucrative if there was capture off of Dave Johnston power plant. You're talking a pipeline maybe 5 miles versus 60 to connect to the Contango line near Salt Creek. So cost advantage for capture at a potential capture project at Dave Johnston significantly changes that project cost-wise. There are 2 others that haven't been announced publicly, but are quite substantial EOR projects using CO2 in various stages that we're involved with. So again, as Mr. Obermueller mentioned, the last project, CO2 EOR project in Wyoming, was the Grieve Field 13 years ago, and a variety of reasons why that lengthy time for new projects. I think another important point for the committee to recognize is that these are all being done by very small companies. These are not EOGs and Anschutz and Continental. It is not the big players that are developing these EOR projects in Wyoming. Very small companies. The TR Operating is the CEO and his son basically running that project. Unfortunately, he has quite a background, as we mentioned, in the EOR world. So these benefits that are discussed to enhance EOR are critical for these small companies. They don't absorb the costs the way a Shell or an Exxon does. So it's quite positive for our state to see small companies taking the lead for enhanced oil recovery in our state.
Thank you, Director Whitman. So just for the benefit of the committee here, could you explain what your role, what the EORI role is and as these projects come forward? How much is your office involved in that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to do that. So EORI is a technical team. We're also small like the Energy Authority. We're 10 people. And basically the technical team is petroleum engineers and petroleum geologists. And our focus is to work with operators in Wyoming to help them basically do anything they can to get more oil out of their field, to minimize that stranded oil that we mentioned earlier. So for these EOR projects, our emphasis and focus with the operator is a collaborative type project where we'll look at their subsurface, we'll look at their reservoir, their geology, and provide confirmation back and forth that their project as designed is a good one. Make suggestions where they could improve their subsurface look. We also facilitate them getting to people they need to talk to in the state. So it's a very interactive process that we use at EORI. We don't charge operators for our service. That's what our budget is for. So they'll come, we'll look at the project, we'll decide if any kind of CA is needed, how public they want their project out there. I think what we're finding and why some of these projects, Mr. Chairman, are not being announced publicly quite yet, when they determine that field A looks very good, there may be other fields really close by that also look quite good. And if, as you've seen with this project near Gillette, in Representative Tarver's district, they took 3 small fields and clustered those. Individually, those fields wouldn't have been appropriate or economic. They would have been appropriate, but they wouldn't have been economic for CO2 EOR. But by combining 3 close fields that are smaller, the project becomes economic. And that is something we're seeing more and more as we work with these operators that are developing the projects. They determine that field A looks quite good for EOR. We confirm that work with them. And they may have other options quite nearby. But as soon as an owner of a field that might be willing to sell hears that somebody's got a great project right next door, the price of that field goes up significantly. So there is still that old oil field kind of keep things quiet until the project's ready to roll. Hopefully I answered your question, probably gave you a little more information than you needed.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate that information. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony and enjoy the mountains while you're there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll do that.
All right. Any other on Zoom? No one on Zoom. With that, we will close public testimony. Members of the committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Lawley, seconded by Representative Campbell. Any discussion? Let's walk through the bill then. We'll go page by page this time. Page number 1. Page 2. Page number 3. Page number 4. Page number 5. Page number 6. Page number 7. Page number 8. Representative Campbell.
What did we decide we're gonna do on these dates to get everything kind of tidied up?
I think that may be in page number 9 that we want to do that.
Well, they start on 8,
Yeah.
continue on
Do you have
9.
anything proposed on page 8, Representative Campbell?
Well, I just wanted to know if we could get a consensus on a date for all of this.
Does anyone have any changes on page number 8? I think we'll deal with that in the later page, Representative. Representative 9, or page 9. Any changes on page number 9? I think page 10 is where we're gonna entertain that motion. Any motions on page 10? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it would be adequate, but subject to correction, on page 10, line 6, to delete Department of Revenue and substitute, leave the word "the" there, but Department of Revenue struck, and then the authority, which is, I believe, how they've been,
Wyoming Energy Authority?
yes, other
Just
places.
Just authority.
Yeah, the other places in the bill,
Is the authority,
Mhm.
okay. Okay, so the motion, the amendment being proposed is, just to be clear, on line 6, page 10, to strike Department of Revenue and insert authority. Is that correct?
correct.
Do we have a second? We have a second by Vice Chair Tarver. Any discussion on the proposed amendment? Senator, please.
You would want to make the same substitution on line 13 to conform.
Well, thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, yeah,
So
May I?
Representative Lawley, is that a friendly amendment?
yes.
So same on line 13 on page 10, striking
Yes.
Department of Revenue and inserting authority.
Yes. The word "the" would remain, just to be clear for the staff
Yeah,
that,
So it would read,
yeah, the authority,
reported by the authority under subsection C of this section.
correct.
Mark, do you have those? Any discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of Representative Lawley's motion to amend on page 10, line 6, striking Department of Revenue and inserting authority, and line 13 on page 10, striking Department of Revenue and inserting authority. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment has passed. Any others on page 10? 11 and 12. Discussion, committee. Representative Vice Chair Tarver.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that, Mr. Sachet, will that work for you?
Mr. Sachet.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that page 10, line 13, I believe that's referring to the taxes we've received on oil, and that would in fact come from us, because those taxes, I believe, are the ones that would need to be transferred. Because the 1.5% would be transferred from the state auditor. That would come from the severance taxes we've received on the EOR.
Representative Tarver.
Mr. Chairman, so we need to amend our amendment, is the answer to that question?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, yes, sir. I believe that can stay as a Department of Revenue.
Mr. Sachet, do we need to clarify that those are the taxes, the funds that are being reported are taxes? Or any way to clarify that? Because I think the committee was a little bit confused there.
Mr. Chairman, by removing the authority in line 6, or by removing the Department of Revenue in line 6, the only thing we're doing is calculating the taxes. So if you wish to clarify that, that would work, but I don't think it's necessary, because the only thing we're doing is calculating what the additional tax is on EOR.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Sachet. So do I entertain a motion? Representative Tarver.
I motion that we, Mr. Chairman, I motion that we amend our earlier amendment back to page 10, line 13, back to where we inserted authority, reinstate Department of Revenue.
Seconded by Representative Lawley. Any discussion? Seeing none, question being called. All those in favor of of reverting back to the original language on page 10, line 13, signify by saying aye. Aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Any, Mark, do you have that? Okay. Any other discussion on the bill? Question being called. This is a roll call vote on Senate File Senate File 17, carbon dioxide enhanced oil recovery stimulus as amended. Mark, would you please call the roll?
Representative, Representative Campbell,
Aye.
Representative Knapp,
Aye.
Representative Larson has voted aye. Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Riggins,
Excused?
Representative Schmidt,
Aye.
Representative Tarver,
Aye.
Representative Weber,
Aye.
Chairman Heiner,
Aye.
8 aye, 1 excused.
Okay, so Senate File 17 has received a recommendation of due pass from the Minerals Committee. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for that heavy lift.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we have another dignitary in the room, Senator Boner. Thank you for being here. And you come up and everybody leaves.
That's right. This bill's just so non-controversial, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you for being here and for your patience in waiting for us. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Boner, Senate District 2. I have a little bill that was a result of a constituent request from an Trona County Commissioner dealing with the Industrial Siting Council process. As you may be aware, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, any wind or solar project or any massive industrial project that meets a certain threshold is required to go through this Industrial Siting Council process, which is very robust and meant to understand the impacts of such projects on a wide range of what we consider to be important in Wyoming, from wildlife to our communities. And certainly, local government has a huge part in that, in particular the county commissioners. And there's a lot of interaction between them, municipalities, and our state agency, the Industrial Siting Council, which is a volunteer board with, I believe, one or a very small amount of staff that has seen a massive influx of work due to the increased activity, in particular with wind and solar. And so what the bill does, it basically modifies the deadlines that we have throughout statute in this process, both for the commissioners and the council, to give them a little bit more time to do this work. This is an alternative to just simply, hiring more state employees. And so this is something we've come up with, working with the county commissioners and many of the affected industry. I can't say they're necessarily excited about it, but they haven't opposed it yet. So that's where we're at with these provisions. That's the idea behind the bill. So pretty straightforward bill, really. You'll see Title 18 is dealing with our county commissioners. This is their side of the process. They have currently up to 60 days to have a public hearing once they receive an application. We're extending that to 90, and with the possible extension of even longer if the applicant, if the developer agrees to it. Then in section 507, you'll see that currently they have to have a decision within 45 days. We're extending that to 60. Then you go into Title 35 on page 3. This is the Industrial Siting Council under the process now. There's a opportunity for an applicant to provide additional information if they submit an application and the agency comes back and says, actually, you forgot this, you need to make this adjustment, we need to make this, give them an opportunity to cure any deficiencies identified by the department. Right now, that's 30 days with the extensions. On the Industrial Siting Council side of the process, we're giving them 60 days because they now have the time, that's a request of industry. And then we're extending the Industrial Siting Council deadline from 90 days to 120 days. January 1st, 2026 effective date, to make sure we don't pull the rug out from anybody who's currently going through the process. They just need a little bit more time. So 6 months later than usual, but still gets the job done, Mr. Chairman, and that's the bill.
All right, thank you, Senator. Questions for Senator Boner? Questions? Senator, so this extends the time significantly for both the counties, county commissioners for their public comment as well as the Industrial Siding Commission Council. Will this potentially slow down a project?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's not the intent. It's important to realize that there's a federal process, which is much lengthier. So the answer is no, so long as they have enough lead time to plan for this change, which is why you have the delayed effective date.
All right. Any questions? Seeing none, Senator, thank you very much. We'll hear from Department of Environmental Quality. Director Parfit, thank you for being here. And
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I see we have some expert here from the Industrial Siding Council too. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Hayner and representatives. Jenny Staben, Administrator of Industrial Siding.
And Mr. Chairman, Todd Parfit, Director of the Department of Environmental Quality. Very few comments here. As was mentioned, the staff of the Industrial Siding Division right now is 3 FTE. It has ranged over the years from 1.5 FTE to 3, and that's just been dependent upon how busy the division is. Just real quickly, the title of this bill is Industrial Wind and Solar Projects, Hearing Deadlines. The wind and solar component of this is applicable to the county rules or statutes, but not necessarily applicable to DEQ. The Industrial Siding Division, it would be for all projects, wind, solar, and anything else that would be jurisdictional under industrial siding. The second thing that I would just mention is that, yes, it does give an additional 30 days for an applicant to cure any deficiencies, and so from 30 to 60 days. And then on the back end, it also then extends out the requirements for the schedule in conducting a public hearing from 90 to 120 days. And to your question, will that slow down the process? Well, if there are no deficiencies, then I think you don't have to wait until 120 days. So we could get back on the normal schedule if there are no deficiencies. If there are complicated deficiencies and they needed the extra time, it would be there for them, and then we would adjust accordingly for scheduling the hearing. And then lastly is, the effective date of January 1, 2026 makes sense so that we don't capture a project that is already underway.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, we're here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director. Any questions for the Director? Director, have we had some timeline difficulties meeting that existing timelines for deficiencies? Have we been up against the wall a couple of times with these projects, trying to get the deficiencies resolved?
Mr. Chairman, I'll let Administrator Staben answer that.
Chairman
Administrator
Heiner.
Staben, please.
Chairman Heiner, representatives. As far as an applicant responding and curing their deficiencies within 30 days, we have not had an issue with that, but typically we do receive that information on the 29th or 30th day.
Oh, okay. So it does require quite a bit of time to clear up some of those deficiencies then. So this would actually relieve some pressure upon the applicant then, is what I'm hearing?
That would
Staben?
be, Chairman Heiner, representatives, that would be correct. Typically, applications only have maybe 2 or 3 deficiencies. Applicants generally are very well prepared in providing the information required by rule and statute. Very rarely are there more than, as I said, 2 or 3 deficiencies. But again, we do typically receive that information on the 30th day.
And Ms. Staben, I realize your office is very, very busy. You have a lot of projects coming through right now. So will this relieve some of the congestion and timing criteria that you have as you're trying to get these projects through, or won't have any impact at all?
May I have a moment, Chairman Heiner?
Yes. and we weren't listening. Please proceed.
Chairman Heiner, representatives. Currently, within the Industrial Siting Act, the division has 30 days to review an application. The applicant has 30 days to cure that deficiency. If the deficiency isn't cured, then the applicant has an additional 15 days to cure the deficiency. Well, now how this process currently works, it does work well. Typically, we do receive, as I said, the information on the last day that it becomes available. What would be helpful in this process, if the purpose of this bill is to provide additional time for local governments to be prepared for their industrial siting hearings, for the industrial siting division and applicants to negotiate permit conditions, for everything to be more prepared for the hearing, what would be most helpful would be to keep our current process in which we have 30 days to review an application, 30 days to respond to deficiencies, but if that additional 30 days was added on the back end for hearings, then that would be helpful for the division to make sure we have all the information we need, as well as all the other parties to these industrial siting permitting hearings. Now, if that isn't necessary, we can, of course, schedule our hearings, to go stay within that 90-day framework. But the 120 days would really help all the parties to these permit proceedings in their preparation and through thorough examination, including negotiations of their MOU for impact assistance.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think the simple answer is yes, it would provide some relief for processing these permits because we'd have additional 30 days to conduct the hearing.
So Director, or Ms. Staben, do you have a proposed amendment that we could add to this bill that would do that for us? To give you additional time for that public hearing?
Chairman Heiner, representatives, the only amendment I would have would be on page 3, line 16, to keep that at 30 days instead of changing it to 60. But to keep the other proposed change as it is written on line 19 and 20 of page 3 to 120 days.
Okay.
So
Continue.
Chairman Heiner and representatives, what it would do is it would keep our review periods the same. Because right now, if we receive information on a 30th day, there's a chance that if this as proposed on line 16, page 3, were to continue, then we might just receive the information on the 60th day instead of the 30th. However, while the Industrial Siting Division is reviewing an application, working through its deficiencies with the applicant, while we are also entered into negotiations for permit conditions, you also have your local governments preparing and putting together their impact assistance requests, their MOUs, and we're all still meeting deadlines for the contested case rules to put on the hearing. So just by adding that extra 30 days, it would enable all the parties to be more prepared, provide more information, and it would also give the council itself more time to review information before the hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Staben. I realize there are a lot of moving parts as all the counties and those involved are getting ready for those public meetings and providing public input. So thank you for that suggestion. Vice Chair, no question.
Got it answered.
Any questions for the Director or Ms. Staben from the Industrial Siting Council? Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Chairman, representatives.
Commissioner Short, thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman, Robert Short, Commerce County Commissioner, Vice President of Wyoming County Commissioners Association.
Please
Thank
proceed.
you for the opportunity to address you in this committee. We stand in support of this bill. Commerce County has been a source of some of these congestive issues associated with ISC, as we've seen a large number of renewable projects in Commerce County. And we understand the burden that it puts on the ISC to have these timelines that are so tight currently, especially if they are complicated by issues associated with deficiencies in the applications. We think the bringer of the bill has done a great job of trying to balance expediency with the amount of time necessary in the case there are deficiencies. And we really do believe this is a great step forward in allowing us the time necessary to thoroughly review and be able to, with certainty, say whether or not these applications are deficient or not and ready to move forward in the process.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'm sure your county has had multiple projects at one time that makes it even more difficult. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is true. We have seen a huge number of projects simultaneously, and it certainly does put a burden on the council.
Thank you. Any questions for the Commissioner? Representative Tarver, Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Short, so there was a proposed amendment to take it back to 30 days because they already have the ability to extend it 15. What, can you give me your thoughts on that?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I really do believe giving them the flexibility to have that additional time up front without having the stress of trying to meet a statutorily defined deadline, even though we know we may be able to ask for an extension, may cause some headaches for the folks that are trying to put together the information. So I think giving them that leeway up front gives them the kind of bright light, knowing that, hey, we do have the time to do this thoroughly and very comprehensively. And then if we're found to be in deficiency, we can get an extension.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Any others in the room that would like to provide testimony on Senate File 154? Seeing none, none in the room, let's go to Zoom.
Kelly Carpenter.
Ms. Carpenter.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Kelly Carpenter, Wyoming Farm Bureau. Thanks for the opportunity to join you virtually. From a landowner perspective, we support the bill. We support county commissioners and the siting council having adequate time to make crucial decisions on wind and solar projects. Because as we all know, these projects impact our communities and states, so it's important not to rush the process and ensure its robustness. Thank you again, and I'll take any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Any questions for Ms. Carpenter or the Wyoming Farm Bureau? Ms. Carpenter, have you been involved with a project that ran against the deadline and had to be, because of the deadline, it created issues? Have you ever had that experience thus far?
Mr. Chairman, I have not. I have heard some anecdotes of those potential situations, but no, I'm not intimately familiar or directly involved in any of those sort of situations.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Thank you for your time. And seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Any other individuals on Zoom? No more. So with that, we'll close public testimony. Members of the committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Campbell, seconded by Representative Lawley, excuse me. Rather than go page by page, any proposed amendments on this? Any discussion? Representative Lawley.
On page 3, line 16, I'm not really sure what to propose, but to say that I am troubled when a department that we have tasked with doing the regulatory work says this would be better a certain way for them. I don't know if we consider splitting the difference or doing something, but I do understand the difficulty of the extension, how it plays in with other deadlines, and the idea if somebody waits till the last minute. So again, welcome.
Senator Boner, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, if you do anything, maybe, the 45 days would be appropriate. That was a request from the affected industries that, if you're going to make this longer for us, if you're going to drop this process, at least give us more time to correct deficiencies. So there might be a little bit of interest or not necessarily a line between the department and the industry, but So I'm sure it'll be fine either way, but yeah, I trust the committee's judgment there.
All right, thank you, Senator. Representative Lawley.
And thank you, Senator Bonner. That is helpful to know. So I would propose, Mr. Chairman, amendment on page 3, line 16, to move the deadline to 45 days. So we'll strike the 60 days and put 45.
Okay, do I hear a second? Seconded by Vice Chair Tarver. Any discussion? Vice Chair.
So I guess my question to the amendment would be, would they still be able to do the 15-day extension if we moved it to 45? Because if needed, then they would still be able to get their 60 days. I guess I would like to have that answered, if someone has the answer.
Ms. Staben, you can just nod your head one way or the other. Would they still have the extension 15 days? That's still in statute, yeah. Okay, so that's an affirmative nod. All right, any other discussion? And just for discussion, I will chime in that the Industrial Siting Commission has done a wonderful job with the additional burdens that are placed upon them. They are very, very busy with the limited staff they have and the number of projects we have here in the state of Wyoming, and larger projects, much more complex and sometimes controversial, sometimes not, but they have been doing a great job. And so, you know, if we can give them any help at all with this timing, I am grateful for that. So with that, no further discussion on the proposed amendment, Representative Lawley's amendment, and it's on page 3, line 16, striking 60 and inserting 45. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment has passed. Any other proposed changes or discussion on the bill? Question being called. Members, we're voting on Senate File 154, Industrial Wind and Solar Projects Hearing Deadline, as amended. Mark, would you please call the roll?
Representative Campbell. Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson has voted aye. Representative Lawley.
Aye.
Representative Riggins.
Excused?
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
Vote is 8 aye and 0 no. 1 excused.
All right, thank you, Mark. So Senate File 154 has received a recommendation for due pass. Representative Campbell, I'll assume you are carrying that, or? Yeah. Okay. And for the Senate File 17, do I have any volunteers to carry that on the floor? That's enhanced carbon dioxide oil recovery.
I'll do it. No one else.
I'll do it. I'll help Lawley.
Okay,
I'll
we'll
do it if you
We'll
will.
do it together if you'll wear
We'll-
that jacket.
Yeah, we'll,
Yeah,
all right. Vice Chair Tarver will carry that, and we'll all support him on that. So, thank you. I'm gonna hit the gavel now. Everybody's ready?